The Mastery of the Blue Jar. Jack Harrington served his top draft ruefully, standing by the ball. He looked back to the tee, mirroring the distance. His face was eloquent of the disgusted contempt which he felt. With the sign, he drew out his iron, executed two wicked swings with it, and hurling in turn a dandelion and a tuft of grass, and then addressed himself firmly to the ball. It is hard when you are 24 years of age and your one ambition in life is to reduce your handicap at golf. To be forced to give time and attention to the problem of earning your living. 5.5 days out of the three saw Jack imprisoned in a kind of mahogany top in the city. Saturday's afternoon and Sunday were religiously devoted to the real business of life. And in an exercise of zeal, he had taken rooms at the small hotel near Shorter Health Links and rose daily at the hour of 6 a.m. to get in an hour's practice before coaching the 8:46 to town. The only disadvantage to the plan was that he seemed constitutionally unable to hit anything at that hour in the morning. A fuzzled iron succeeded a muff drive. His machine shots ran merely along the ground, and 4 puts seemed to the minimum on any green. Jack Sign grasped his iron firmly and repeated to himself the magic word left arm, right thought, and don't look up. Left arm, right thought, and don't look up. He swung back and then stopped, petrified as a shrill cry rent the silence of the summer's morning. Murder, it called. Help, murder. It was a woman's voice, and it died away at the end into a short of gurgling sing. Jack flung down his club and ran in the direction of the sound. It had come from the somewhere quite near at hand. This practical part of the course was quite wild country, and there were few houses about. In fact, there was only one near at hand, a small picture-rich cot which Jack had often noticed for its air of old world daintiness. It was toward this cottage that he ran. It was hidden from him by a heather-covered slope. But he rounded this, and in less than a minute was standing with his hand on the small latched gate. There was a girl standing in the garden, and for a moment Jack jumped to the natural conclusion that it was she who had uttered the cry for help. But he quickly changed his mind. She had a little basket in her hand, half full of weeds, and had evidently just straightened herself up from weeding a wide border of pansies. Her eyes, Jack noticed, were just like pansies themselves, velvety and soft and dark and more violet than blue. She was like a pansy, although in her straight purple linen gown. The girl was looking at Jack with an expressions midway between annoyance and surprise. "I beg your pardon," said the young man, "but did you cry out just now?" "I? No, indeed." Her surprise was so genuine that Jack felt confused. Her voice was very soft and pretty with slight foreign inflection, but you must have heard it, he exclaimed. It came from somewhere just near here. She started at him. I heard nothing at all. Jack, in his turn, started at her. It was perfectly incredible that she should not have heard that. It was perfectly incredible that she should not have heard that organized appeal for help. And yet her calmness was so evident that he could not believe she was lying to him. It came from somewhere close at hand, he insisted. She was looking at him suspiciously now. What did it say? She said. Murder, help, murder, murder, help, murder, repeated the girl. Somebody has played a trick on you, Muncher. Who could be murdered here? Who could be murdered here? Jack looked about him with the confused ideas of discovering a dead body upon a garden path. Yet he was still perfectly sure that the cry he had heard was real and not a product of his imagination. He looked up at the cottage windows. Everything seemed perfectly still and peacefully. Do you want to search our house? Asked the girl dryly. She was so clearly skeptical that Jack's confession grew deeper than ever. He turned away. I'm sorry, he said. It must have come from higher up in the woods. He raised his cap and retreated, glancing back over his shoulder. He saw that the girl had calmly resumed her wedding. For some time he hurried through the woods but could find no sign of anything unusual having occurred. Yet he was so positive as ever that he had really heard the cry. In the end, he gave up the search and hurried home to bolt his breakfast and caught the 8:46 by the usual narrow margin of a second or so. He consciously prickled him a little as he sat in the train. Ought he not to have immediately reported what he had heard to the police? That he had not done so was slowly owing to the Pansy girl incredulity. She had clearly suspected him of romancing. Possibly the police might do the same. Was he absolutely certain that he had heard the cry? By now he was not nearly so positive as he had been, the natural result of trying to recapture a lost sensation. Was it some bird's cry in the distance that he had twisted into the semblance of a woman's voice? But he rejected the suggestion angrily. It was a woman's voice, and he had heard it. He remembered looking at his watch just before the cry had come. As nearly as possible, it must have been 5:20 past 7 when he had heard the call. That might be a fact useful to the police if anything should be discovered. Going home that evening, he scanned the evening papers anxiously to see if there were any mention of a crime having been committed. But there was nothing, and he hardly knew whether to be relieved or disappointed. The following morning was wet, so wet that even the most hardened golfer might have his enthusiasm damped. Jack rose at the last possible point, gulped his breakfast, ran for the train, and again eagerly scanned the papers. Still no mention of any gruesome discovery have been made. The evening papers told the same thing. Queer, said Jack to himself, but there is probably some blinking little boys having a game together up in the woods. He was out early the following morning. As he passed the cottage, he noted out of the trail of his eyes that the girl was out in the garden again, wedding. Evidently a habit of hers, he did a practically good approach shot and hoped that she had noticed it. As he did, as he teed up on the next tee, he glanced at his watch. Just 5:20 past 7, he murmured. I wonder. The words were frozen on his lips. From behind him come the same cry which had so startled him before. A woman's voice in dire distress. Murder, help, murder. Jack raced back. The Pansy girl was standing by the gate. She looked startled, and Jack ran up to her triumphantly crying out, "You heard in this time?" Anyway, her eyes were wild with some emotion he could not fathom, but he noticed that she shrank back from him as he approached, and even glanced back at the house as thought she meditated running to it for shelter. She shook her head, staring at him. I heard nothing at all, she said wonderingly. It was though as had struck him a blow between the eyes. Her sincerity was so evident that he could not believe her. Yet he didn't have imagined it. He he could not. He heard her voice speaking gently, almost with sympathy. You have had the shell shock, yes? In a flash, he understood her look of fear. Her glance back at the house, she thought that he suffered from delusion. And then, like a rush of cold water, come the horrible thought. She thought, was she right? Did he suffer from delusions? Obsessed by the horror of the thoughts, he ran and stumbled away without one shifting a word. The girl watched him go, sighed, shook her head, and bent down to her reading again. Jack endeavored to reason matters out with himself. If I hear the damned thing again, the 25 minutes past 7, he said to himself, it's clear that I have got hold of hallucination of some sort, but I wouldn't hear it. He was nervous all that day and went to bed early, determined to put the matter to the proof the following morning. As was perhaps naturally in such a case, he remained awake half the night and finally overslept himself. It was 20 past 7 by the time he was clear of the hotel and running toward the links. He realized that he would not be able to get to the fatal spot by 25 past, but surely, if the voice was a hallucination, pure and simple, he would hear it anywhere. He ran on, his eyes fixed on the hands of his watch. 25 past from far come the echo of a woman's voice calling. The words could not be distinguished, but he was convinced that it was the same cry he had heard before, and that it came from the same spot somewhere in the near neighborhood of the cottage. Strangely enough, that fact recurred to him. It might, after all, be a ox. Unlikely as it seemed, the girl herself might be playing a trick on him. He sat his shoulders resolutely and took out a clump from his golf bag. He would play the few holes up to the cottage. The girl was in the garden as usual. She looked up this morning, and when he raised his cap to her, said good morning rather shyly. She looked, he thought, lovelier than ever. Nice day, isn't it? Jack called out, cheerily cursing the unavoidable banality of the observation. Yes, indeed, it is lovely. Good for the garden, I expect. The girl smiled a little, disclosing a fascinating dimple. Alas, no, no, for my flowers the rain is needed. See, they are all dried up. Jack accepted the invitation of her gesture and came up to the low hatch dividing the garden from the course, looking over it into the garden. They seemed right, he remarked, awkwardly conscious as he spoke of the girl's slightly pitying glance running over him. The sun is good, it is not, she said, for the flowers one can always water them, but the sun gives strength and repairs the health. Mishra is much better today. I can see her encouraging tone annoyed Jack intensely. Course still all he said to himself. I believe she tried to core me by suggesting I am perfectly well, he said. That is good, then returned the girl quickly and soothingly. Jack had irritating feeling that she didn't believe him. He played a few more holes and hurried back to breakfast. As he ate it, he was conscious, not for the first time, of the close security of man who sat at the table next to him. He was a man of middle age with a powerful, forceful face. Not for the first time. He had a small dark beard and very piercing gray eyes, and on his an occurrence of manner which placed him among the higher ranks of the professional classes. His name Jack knew was Levinton, and he had heard vague rumors as to his being a well known medical specialist. But as Jack was not a frequent of Harley Street, the name had conveyed little or nothing to him. But this morning he was very conscious of his quiet observation under which he was being kept, and it frightened him. frightened him a little. Was his secret written plainly in his face for all to see? Did this man, by reason of his professional calling, know that there was something amiss in the hidden grey matter? Jack shivered at the thought. Was it true? Was he really going mad? Was the whole thing a illusion, or was it a gigantic hoax? And suddenly, a very simple way of testing the solution occurred to him. He had, he thought, been alone on his round. Supposing someone else was with him, then one out of three things might happen. The voice might be silent. They might both hear it, or he only might hear it. That evening, he proceeded to carry his plan into effort. Levington was a man he wanted with him. They fell into conversation easily enough. The elder man might have been waiting for such an opening. It was clear that for some reason or other Jack interested him. The latter was able to come quite easily and naturally to the suggestion that they might play a few holes together before breakfast. The the arrangement was made for the following morning. They started out a little before 7. It was a perfect day, still a cloudless but not too warm. The doctor was playing well. Jack Ridgely, his whole mind was intent of the forthcoming crisis. He kept glancing at his watch. They reached the seventh tee, between which and the hole the cottage was situated, about 20 past 7. The girl, as usual, was in the garden as they passed. She did not look up. Two balls lay on the green, jacks near the hole, the doctor's some little distance away. I have got this for it, said Livington. I must go for it, I suppose. He bent down, judging the line he should take. Jack stood wriggled, his eyes glued to his watch. It was exactly 25 minutes past 7. The ball ran swiftly along the grass, stopped on the edge of the hole, hesitated, and dropped in. Good put, said Jack. His voice sounded horsey and unlike himself. He shoved his wrist watch further up his arm with a sign of overwhelming relief. Nothing had happened. The spell was broken. If you don't mind waiting a minute, he said, I think I will have a pipe. They paused a while on the 80. Jack filled and lit the pipe with fingers that trembled a little in spite of himself. An enormous weight seems to have lifted from his mind. Lord, what a good day it is, he remarked, starting at the prospect ahead of him with great contempt. Go on, Levington, your sweep. And then it comes just at the very instant the doctor was hitting a woman's voice high and recognized murder, help, murder, murder, help, murder. The pie fell from Jack's nervously hand as he spun around in the direction of the sound and then, remembering, gazed breathlessly at his company. Levington was looking down the course, shutting his eyes a bit short, just cleared the bunker through, I think. He had heard nothing. The world seemed a spin round with Jack. He took a step or two, lurching heavily. When he recovered himself, he was lying on the saw turf and Livingston was bending over him. There, take it easy now, take it easy. What did I do? You fainted, young man, or gave a very good try at it. My God, said Jack, and grounded. What's the trouble? Something on your mind? I will tell you in 1 minute, but I will like to ask you something first. The doctor lighted his own pipe and settled himself on the bank. Ask anything you like, he said comfortably. You have been watching me for the last day or two. Why? Livingston's eyes twinkled a little. That's rather an awkward question. A cat can look at a king. You know, don't put me off. I'm earnest. Why was it? I have a vital reason for asking. Livingston's face grew serious. I will answer you quite honestly. I recognized in you all the signs of a man laboring under a sense of acute strain, and it intrigued me what that stain could be. I can tell you that easily enough, said Jack bitterly. I am going mad. He stopped dramatically, but his statement, not seeming to engross the interest and contractions he expected, he repeated it. I tell you, I am going mad, very curiously, murmured Levington, very curiously. Indeed, Jack felt indignant. I suppose that's all it does seem to you. Doctors are so damned callous. Come, come, my young friend, you are talking at me. To being with, although I have taken my degree, I do not practice medicine. Strictly speaking, I am not a doctor, not a doctor of the body. That it. Jack looked at him keenly. Or the mind, yes, in a sense, but more truly, I can myself a doctor of the soul. Oh, oh, I perceive the disarrangement in your tone, and yet we must use some word to denote the active, which can be separated and exist independently of its fleshy home, the body. You have got to come to terms with the soul, you know, young man. It isn't just a religious term invented by clergymen, but we will call in the mind or the subconscious self or any term that suits you better. You took offense at my tone just now, but I can assure you that it really did strike me as very curious that such a well balanced and perfectly normal young man as yourself should suffer from the delusion and that he was going out of his mind. I'm not out of my mind, all right? Absolutely blamed. You will forgive me for say so, but I don't believe it. I suffer from delusions. After dinner, no, in the morning, can't be done, said the doctor, relighting his pipe which had gone out. I tell you, I hear things that no one else hears. One man in 1,000 can see the moons of Jupiter, because the other 9,099 cannot see them. There is no reason to doubt that the moons of Jupiter exist, and certainly no reason for calling the thousandth man a lunatic. The moons of Jupiter are a proved scientific fact. It is quite possible that the delusion of today may be the proved scientific facts of tomorrow. In spite of himself, Livingston's matter of fact manner was having its effect upon Jack. He felt immeasurable, soothed, and cheered. The doctor looked at him attentively for a minute or two and then nodded. That's better, he said. The terrible with you young fellows is that you are so cocksure nothing can exist outside your own philosophy. That you get the wind up when something occurs to jolt you out of that opinion. Let's hear your ground for believing that you are going mad, and we will decide whether or not to you up afterward. Lock you up afterward. As faithfully as he could, Jack narrated the whole series of occurrences. But what I can't understand, he ended, is why this morning it should come at 7:30, 5 minutes later. 5 minutes late. Livington thought for a minute or two. Then what's the time now by your watch? He asked. 7:45, replied Jack, consulting it. That's simple enough. Then mine says 20 to 8. Your watch is 5 minutes fast. That's a very interesting and important point to me. In fact, it's invaluable. In what way? Jack was beginning to get interested. Well, the obvious explanation is that on the first morning you did hear some such cry. May have been a joke, may not. On the following morning, you suggested yourself to hear it at exactly the same time. I'm sure I didn't. Not consciously, of course, but the subconsciously plays as some funny tricks, you know. But anyway, that explanation wouldn't wash. If it was a case of suggestion, you would have heard the cry at 25 minutes past 7 by your watch. And you could never have heard it when the time as you thought was past. Well, it's obvious, isn't it? This cry for help occupies a perfectly definite place at time in space. The place is in the vicinity of that cottage, and the time is 25 minutes past 7. Yes, but why should I be the one to hear it? I don't believe in ghosts and all that spook stuff, spirits rapping and all the rest of it. Why should I hear the damned thing? That we cannot tell at present. It's a curious thing that many of the beast mediums are made out of confirmed skeptics. It isn't the people who are interested in occupied. It isn't the people who are interested in occult phenomena who get the manifestations. Some people see and hear things that other people don't. We don't know. why, and 9 times out of 10, they don't want to see or hear them and are convinced that they are suffering from delusions, just as you were. It's like electricity, some substances are good conductors, others are non conductors, and for a long time we didn't know why and had to be connected just to accept the fact. Nowadays we do know why. Someday, no doubt, we shall know why you hear this thing and I and the girl don't. Everything's governed by natural law. There is no such thing really as the supernatural. Finding out the law that governs so called psychic phenomena is going to be a two job, but every little helps. But what am I going to do? Asked Jack. Levington shook, struggled. Practically, I see. Well, my young friend, you are going to have a good breakfast and get off to the city without worrying your head further about things you don't understand. I, on the other hand, am going to poke about and see what I can find out about that cottage back there. That's where the mystery centers. I dare swear Jack rose to his feet. Right, sir, I am on, but I say yes, Jack flushed awkwardly. I'm sure the girl's all right, he murmured. Levington looked amused. You didn't tell me she was a pretty girl. Well, cheer up. I think the mystery started before her time. Jack arrived home that evening in a perfect fever of curiosity. He was by now pinning his faith blindly to Levington. The doctor had accepted the matter so naturally. He had so had been so matter of fact and unperturbed by it that Jack said he found his new friend waiting for him in the hall when he came down for dinner, and the doctor suggested that they should dine together at the same table. Any news, sir? Asked Jack. And actually, I have collected the life history of Health Cottage all right. It was tended first by an old gardener and his wife. The old man died, and the old woman went to her daughter. Then a builder got hold of it and modernized it with great success, selling it to a city gentleman who used it for weekends. About a year ago, he sold it to the some people called Turner, Mr. and Mrs. Turner. They seems to have been rather a curious couple for all I can make out. He was an Englishman, his wife was probably supposed to the partly Russian he and was a very handsome, exotic looking woman. They lived very quietly, seeing no one hardly ever going outside the cottage garden. The local rumor goes that they were afraid of something, but I don't think we ought to really be. And then suddenly one day they departed clearly out one morning early and never come back. The agents here got a letter from Mr. Turner written from London instructing him to sell up the place as quickly as possible. The furniture was sold off and the house itself was sold to a Mr. Marveller. He only actually lived in a fortnight, then he advertised it to be left furniture. The people who have it now are a consumptive French professor and his daughter. They have been there just 10 days. Jack digested this in silence. I don't see that that gets us any further, he said at last. Do you? I rather want to know more about it, more about the Turners, said Livingston quietly. They left very early in the morning, you remember? As far as I can make out, nobody actually saw them go. Mr. Turner has been silent, but I cannot find anybody who has seen Mistress Turner. Jack paled. It cannot be. You don't mean. Don't excite yourself, young man. The influence of anyone at the point of death, and especially of violent death, upon their surrounding is very strong. Those surroundings might those surroundings might conceivably absorb that influence, transmitting it in turn to a suitable tone received in this case yourself. But why me? Murmured Jack rebelliously. Why not someone who could do some good? You are regarding the force as intelligent and purposeful and tested instead of blind and mechanical. I do not believe myself in earthbound spirits hunting a spot of one practical purpose, but the thing I have seen again and again until I can hear it, believe it to be pure coincidence, is a kind of blind groping together justice, a substance moving of blind forces always working absolutely toward that end. He shook himself as thought casting off some obsession that preoccupied him and turned to Jack with a ready smile. Let us banish the subject for tonight at all events, he suggested. Jack agreed readily enough, but did not find it so easy to banish the subject from his own mind. During the weekend, he made vigorous inquiries of his own, but succeeded in electing little more than the doctor had done. He had definitely given up playing golf before breakfast. The next link in the chain come from an unexpected quarter. On getting back one day, Jack was informed that a young lady was waiting to see him. To his intense surprise, it proved to be the girl of the garden, the Pansy girl, as he always called her in his own mind. She was very nervous and confused. You will forgive me, Marcellus, for coming to seek you like this, but there is something I want to tell you. I. She looked round uncertainly. Come in here, said Jack, leading the way into the now deserted ladies' drawing room of the hotel. Our apartment it a good deal of red plush about it. Now sit down, Miss Marchard. Marchard. Felise Marchard. Sit down, Marchard, and tell me all about it. Felise sat down obediently. She was dressed in dark green today, and the beauty and charm of the proud little face was more evident than ever. Jack's heart beat faster as he sat down beside her. It is like this, explained Phyllis. We have been here but a short time, and from the beginning we hear the house, our so sweet little house, is haunted. No servant will stay in this. That does not matter so much me. I can do the manage and cook easily enough. Angel, thought the inflated young man. She is wonderful, but the maintained an outward semblance of business like attention. This talk of ghosts, I think it is all fully that I until 4 days ago, Monsieur, 4 night running, I have had the same dream. A lady stands here. She is beautiful, tall, and very fair. In her hands, she too holds a blue chain jar. She is distressed, very distressed, and continually she holds out the jar to me as thought imploring me to do something with it. But alas, she cannot speak. I do not know what she asks. That was the dream for the first 2 nights. But the night before last, there was more of it. She and the blue jar faded away, and suddenly I heard her voice crying out. I know it is her voice. You comprehended. And oh, Marshalls, the words she said are those you spoke to me that morning. Murder, help, murder. I awoke in terror. I saw to myself it is a nightmare. The words you heard are an accident. But last night the dream come again. Marshalls, what is it? You too have heard. What shall we do? Felice's face was terrified. Her smile hands clasped themselves together and she gazed appealingly at Jack. The latter affected an unconcern he did not feel. That's all right, Medicius Marchant. You must not worry. I tell you that I had like you to do. If you don't mind, repeat the whole story to a friend of mine who is staying here, a Dr. Levington. Felsen signified her willingness to adopt this course, and Jack went off in search of Levington. He returned with him a few minutes later. Levington gave the girl a knee scrutiny as he acknowledged Jack's hurried introductions. With a few reassuring words, he soon put the girl at her ease, and he is his turn. Listen attentively to her story. Very curious, he said. When she had finished, you have told your father of this? Felise shook her head. I have not lied to worry him. He is very ill still. Her eyes filled with tears. I keep from him anything that might excite or agitate him. I understand, said Livington kindly, and I am glad you come to us. Merchant, Harrington here, as you know, had an exercise something similar to yours. I think I may say that you were are well on the it. There is nothing else that you can think of. Felton gave a quick movement. Of course, how stupid I am. It is point of the whole story. Look, Murness, at what I found at the back of one of the cupboards where it had slipped behind it. She held out of them a dirty piece of drawing paper on which was executed roughly in watercolors a sketch of a woman. It was a mere dub, but the likeness was probably good enough. It represented a tall, fair woman with something subtle, un-English about her face. She was standing by a table on which was standing a blue chain jar. I only found it this morning, explained Felise. Moines laid Doctor that that is the face of the woman I saw in my dream, and that is the identical blue jar. Extraordinary, commented Levington. The key to the mystery is evidently the blue jar. It looks like a Chinese jar to me, probably an old one. It seems to have a curious raised pattern for it. It is Chinese, declared Jack. I have seen an exactly similar one of my uncle's collection. He is a great collector of Chinese porcelain, and I remember noticing a jar just like this a short time ago. This the Chinese jar, Mr. Levington. He remained a minute or two lost in thoughts, then raised his head suddenly, a curious light shining in his eyes. Harrington, how long has your uncle had that jar? How long? I really don't know. Think. Did he buy it lately? I don't know. Yes, I believe he did. Now I come to think of it, I'm not very interested in proclaim myself. But I remember his showing me his recent activities, and this was one of them. Less than 2 months ago, the Turners left hated cottage with just 2 months ago. Yes, I believe it was. Your uncle attends country sales something he's always tolling around to sales. Then there is no inherent improbability in your assumption that he bought his this practical piece of Brooklyn at the sale of the Turner's think. A curious coincidence, or perhaps what I call the grouping of blind justice. Hargington, you must find out from your uncle at once where he bought this jar. Jack's face fell. I'm afraid that's impossible, Uncle. George is away on the continent. I don't even know where to write to him. How long will he be away? 3 weeks to a month at least. There was a silence. Felix sat looking inexorably from one man to other. Is there nothing that we can do? She asked timidly. Yes, there is one thing, said Levington, in a tone of surprise excited. It is usually perhaps, but I believe that it will succeed. Harrington, you must get hold of that jar. Bring it down here, and if permits, we will spend a night at Theatre Cottage taking the blue jar with us. Jack felt his skin creeps uncomfortably. What do you think will happen? He asked uneasily. I have not the slightest idea, but I honestly believe that the mystery will be solved and the ghost laid. Quite possible there may be a false bottom to the jar and something it concealed inside it. If no phenomena occurred, we must use our own intensity. Phyllis claps her hand. It is a wonderful idea, she exclaimed. Her eyes were alight with enthusiasm. Jack did not feel nearly so enthusiastic, in fact. He was inwardly funking it badly, but nothing would have introduced him to admit the fact before Fasil. The doctor acted as though his suggestion were the most natural one in the world. When can you get the jar? Asked Felise, turning to Jack. Tomorrow, said the latter unwillingly. He had to go through with it now, but the memory of the friendless cry for help that had haunted him each morning was something to be restlessly thrust down and not thought about more than could in question. He went to his uncle's house the following evening and took away the jar in question. He was more than ever convinced when he saw it again that it that it was identical one pictured in the watercolored sketch. But carefully as he looked it over, he could see no sign that it contained a secret receptacle of it. It was 7 o'clock when he and Livingston arrived at a cottage. Felise was on the lookout of them for them and opened the door softly before they had time to knock. Come in, she whispered. My father is asleep upstairs and we must not awake him. I have made coffee for you in here. She led the way into the small, cozy sitting room. A spirit lamp stood in the grate, and bending over it, she brewed them both some fragrant. Then Jack unfastened the Chinese jar from its many wrappings. Felix gasped as her eyes fell on it. But yes, he cried eagerly. That is it. I would know it's anywhere. Meanwhile, Levington was making his own preparations. He removed all the ornaments from a small table and set it in the middle of the room. Round it is round it he placed three chains. Then taking the blue jar from Jack, he placed it in the center of the table. Now he said, we are ready, turn off the lights and let us sit round the table in the darkness. The other obeyed him. Levington's voice spoke again out of the darkness. Think of nothing or of everything. Do not force the mind. It is possible that one of us has mediumistic powers. If so, that person will go into a trance. Remember, there is nothing to fear. Cast out fear from your head, hearts, and drift. His voice died away, and there was silence. Minute by minute, the silence seems to grow more pregnant with possibilities. It was all very well for Levington to say, cast out fear. It was not fear that Jack felt, it was panic. And he was almost certain that Felix felt the same way. Suddenly he heard her voice, low and terrified. Something terrible is going to happen. I felt it. Cast out fear, said Levington. Do not fight against the influence. The darkness seemed to get darker and the silence more acute, and nearer came that indefinable sense of menace. Jack felt himself cooking, stifling. The evil thing was very near, and then the moment of conflict passed. He was drifting downstream, his lids closed. Peace, darkness. Jack stirred slightly. His head was heavy as lead. Where was he? Sunshine. Birds. Where was he? Sunshine, birds. He lay staring up at the sky. Then it will come back to him. The sitting, the little room, Felix and the doctor. What happened? What had happened? He sat up, his head throbbing unpleasantly, and looked round him. He was lying in a little copse not far from the cottage. No one else was near him. He took out his watch. To his amazement, it registered 12:30. Jack struggled to his feet and ran as fast as he could in the direction of the cottage. They must have been alarmed by his failure to come out of the trance and carried him out into it. Arrived at the cottage, he knocked loudly at the door, but there was no answer and no sign of life about it. They must have gone off to get help or else. Jack felt an indefinable fear invade him. What had happened last night? What had happened last night? He made his way back to the hotel as quick as possible. He was about to make some inquiries at the office when he was diverted by a colossal punch in the ribs which nearly knocked by him. Turning in some indications, he beheld a white-haired old gentleman, whizzing with mirth. Didn't expect me, my boy, didn't expect me. Hey, said this individual. Why, Uncle George, I thought you were miles away in Italy somewhere. Ah, but I wasn't. Landed. Landed at Dover last night. Thought I'd motor up to town and stop here to see you on the way. And what did I find out of the story? Nice going on. Uncle George Jack checked him firmly. I have got the most extraordinary story to tell you. I dare say you wouldn't believe it. I dare say I shouldn't laugh the old man. But I must have something to eat. Continued Jack. I am famished. He led the way to the dining room, and over a absental repast he narrated the whole story. And God knows what's become of them, he ended. His uncle seemed on the verge of apoplexy. The jar? He managed the ejectable at last. The blue jar? What become of that? The blue jar. What become of that? Jack started at him in non comprehension, but somewhere in the torrent of words that followed, he began to understand. It come with a rush, being unique gem of my collection worth £10,000 at least. Offer from Gorgum, the American millionaire, only one of its kind in the world. Confound it. Sir, have you done with my blue jar? Sir, have you done with my blue jar? Jack rushed from the room. He must find Livington. The young lady at the office eyed him coldly. Dr. Livington left late last night by motor. He felt a note for you. Jack tore it open. It was short and to the point. My dear young friend, is the day of the supernatural over? Not quite, especially when trickled out in new scientific language. Kindest regards from Felise, invalid father, and myself. We have 12 or start, which ought to be ample. Your ever Ambrosius Levington, Doctor of the Soul. Levington, Doctor of the Soul. End of the mastery of the blue jar.